Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Steven Railston. I'm joined as usual by Samuel Luckhurst. We're recording this episode on a Thursday afternoon. It might go out on Friday morning. It might be with you on Thursday night. We're not quite sure. But we're going to get stuck into Thomas Tuchel to begin with because he has been appointed England's manager this week. Some huge news. There's some interest from United into Tuchel. And then the second part, we'll look ahead to the Brentford game on Saturday afternoon at Old Trafford. A lovely traditional 3 p.m. kickoff slot. So to begin with, Samuel, Tommy Tuchel, a German manager managing England football team. Who would have thought? He signed an 18-month contract which begins in January, so he will be in charge for the 2026 World Cup in America. It is the field for a potential Erik ten Hag replacement is starting to really narrow down now. Not that it was ever wide in the first place.
Well, I thought that for those who downloaded our podcast on Monday, that must have made for a really, really poor listen, unfortunately, in the end, because it aged. It did not age well. Things changed very quickly. I even spoke to a contact on the Tuesday morning. In fact, they messaged me saying, do you think that maybe the Tuchel stuff is just trying to get a rise out United? And it proved to be anything but. It was not a tactic whatsoever. It was obviously very concrete, and the timeline around that is quite fascinating. In the FA said in their statement that he signed a contract last Tuesday. That was the day after I did a story on United's interest in Tuchel. On Tuesday, was it Tuesday this week? There was a lot, or Monday, there was a lot of noise about Pep Guardiola from some of the nationals, and I was told that he was certainly the FA's preferred choice, but he was never going to leave mid-season. And so you wondered at that point whether the FA would make an allowance and wait for Guardiola next summer. The problem with that would have been that City have got this marathon season that ends in mid-July, possibly with the Club World Cup final. So that would have given Guardiola less than 12 months to prepare with England if he was inclined to leave City and take over as the England coach to prepare for the World Cup. With Tuchel, it is pretty illogical that his contract's only becoming active on January the 1st, but it's 18 months to prepare for a World Cup. He was clearly their second choice. I think he's a very good choice for England. I think there are always bound to be xenophobes who come out of the woodwork over something like this, but he is a brilliant choice. His record in cup competitions is very impressive. He got to 5 finals with Chelsea in a 19-month period, which is pretty extraordinary going. And yes, he didn't win a lot of those finals, but England haven't won a final since 1966. So just being in the conversation is an achievement. And I think it's an exciting time if you're an England fan. Certainly if you're a journalist covering England, I think it's a hell of an upgrade on Lee Carsley, whose mixed messages I suspect also prompted the FA to take action or to clarify that the position would be occupied by Tuchel as Gareth Southgate's permanent replacement. It is illogical that Carsley's going to take charge of the games next month. And of course, where United come all into this is that they have missed the boat on another great coach. Another elite coach, I should say. I think great is maybe overstating it a bit with Tuchel, but we've seen that happen before. They'd renewed interest in Tuchel this season after considering him in the summer. That came out in some of the stories this week as well. I mean, one of the most thoroughly sourced stories. I think we've got a good idea where it came from, or certainly I have as well. I'm not too sure if I spoke to you about that earlier, but the fact that United were cropping up in those stories as well. I think Tuchel was asked about United yesterday, and it was interesting what he said in response, how it was mainly the pitch from England and it was nothing against any other parties, but that they had the chance to appoint him. They had the chance to appoint him when he was out of work after leaving PSG, a very brief window where nobody expected anything to happen, but that was a decision that did not age well because he's a far better coach and manager than Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, who was, of course, the United manager at that time. And they've had another opportunity to appoint him. They've had 2 opportunities really to appoint him this calendar year, and they've they've stood still. And Manchester United has been a club that, unfortunately, for them in the past, as part of 20 years, really, dating back to the Glazers takeover. It was masked for a long time by Sir Alex Ferguson, but they are a club that have stood still for an awfully long period, and there's still an element of inertia there.
Yeah, I think it'll be a brilliant appointment for England, and it's interesting how he has signed a short-term contract. In his press conference, he was asked about that, and he went, "I need to work on my long-term game," which was quite a funny moment. It
Yeah.
provoked some chuckles from the journos in attendance. But we talked about that in regards to United, how Tuchel probably would have been an imperfect solution because he is quite a short-term manager. He would have came in and likely improved results. Well, it can't get much worse than it is at the moment. But whether he was the man for the long-term Ineos project, I wasn't completely convinced. But with the England job, it makes sense, doesn't it? Because they need someone who can get England across the line. They've hit the bar now in a few major tournaments under Gareth Southgate. And if Tuchel can get to the World Cup, which you'd expect in America, and win that trophy, the first since 1966, that would be a phenomenal achievement. And if he doesn't do that, I guess he'd be considered that he's failed, really, because that is his remit. That is why he's been brought in. You just mentioned his comments there, Samuel. I thought they were really interesting, actually, because he said it wasn't against anyone else, any other party. But did you see what he said about, pardon me, about how confidential the process was? He said it was very confidential, very trustful, and straightforward. Now, when I heard that, my mind instantly thought to the summer when Sir Jim Ratcliffe met with Tuchel in Monaco, and they did have talks about potentially replacing Ten Hag. Is that maybe a dig at United? And it's hard to say it's a dig at United because they're not the ones who released that information. It was reported by journalists who that's their jobs to find out this stuff. Is it possible that Tuchel was maybe offended by that and how that got out? Because it didn't particularly make him look bad, that information, but it didn't make him particularly look good when that came out either, did it?
I think there was, I mean, I was off yesterday, but there's the possibility that there was a minor, not particularly malicious dig there. I think what was more telling for me, listening to some of it while I was in transit yesterday on my day off, was that he always wanted to come back to England. And that was obvious when we spoke to him at Old Trafford last season, and he was fluttering his eyelashes at United. And you knew then and there that, given the way it goes at Bayern Munich and given the lay of the land at Bayern at the time as well. I mean, I think a couple of days before that, it was before that, they just had a bad result. And you look at the grief a Bayern Munich manager gets from former players in Germany, and you wonder why United complain about the coverage they get at times over here. Sometimes it's a lot worse with Bayern Munich in Germany. And so I think everybody could see that it was probable that Tuchel would not be at Bayern this season. And of course, that decision to leave was taken before the end of last season. And it was always obvious that, given the way he coaches, given his nature, given his communication, given his time with Chelsea, it was inevitable that he was always going to come back to England. And there was only one club he could have come back to in England, and that was Man United. And that's why United met with him. That's why they renewed their interest in him recently. And I suppose the punchline is that he came back to England, but he came back to England to manage England. Of course, his name would have been in the conversation on bookies' chalkboards, but it didn't seem there was ever that much noise around him until this week, when it became apparent very, very quickly, all of a sudden, that he was going to become the New England manager on the Tuesday. And then, I mean, I got an email yesterday morning inviting me and inviting others who are on the mailing list to his press conference unveiling at Wembley 4 or 5 hours later, which, if I was working, it'd have been a struggle to get down to anyway, if indeed I was inclined to cover it, given the time distance. But that's just how quickly things changed. I mean, we were not really giving Tuchel to England the time of day on Monday, and there he was on Wednesday in that vast lecture theatre of a press conference room at Wembley, being unveiled by the FA. And from what I was told yesterday morning before the press conference, because I did have to do a little bit of work on my day off, or I chose to, was that they did obviously interview English candidates. I was told that Graham Potter interviewed for it, which is not a surprise whatsoever, given that he's out of work, he's English, he is a good coach, despite what happened to him at Chelsea. But the FA felt that there wasn't an English candidate, and you'll be pleased to hear this as well as a Newcastle fan, of course. They didn't think there was an English candidate who had the requisite gravitas or international pedigree to take charge of what they consider to be a world-class squad. And I completely get that. You want the best chance possible of winning the World Cup. And I would argue that United England have a better chance of winning the World Cup with Thomas Tuchel as their coach than had they appointed Eddie Howe, who would have been a worthy replacement. And I, as I said about that podcast we recorded at the start of the week, I said that I felt as though it should be an English coach. I'd have, if we'd got onto Guardiola then, I'd have probably said if you're to make an allowance for a foreign coach, then it should be Guardiola. I've absolutely no problem with England hiring Thomas Tuchel. I think it's a fascinating appointment and a very good appointment as well. So that's how much I'm changing my tune. But I also felt that there was a compelling case to put Potter in, who I always have felt is England material. Maybe that will happen in 18 months down the line. Who knows? Eddie Howe would have been a worthy appointment as well. Beyond those two, it is very, very difficult to identify any other English candidates. And as I just said, I think Tuchel is a better coach than those two, if you're just analysing them individually and objectively. And so, again, where United come into this is not only have they missed the boat, but I genuinely do not know where they go from here, because they've got a manager there who they really should have replaced some time ago. And the goalposts have already changed in the summer. I think there was a way of getting rid of Ten Hag and hiring Kieran McKenna and saying, yes, this guy hasn't managed in the Premier League, but he coached at the club for just over 5 years. He's done great work at Ipswich Town. He's young. We believe in him. It's a long-term project. We're going to back him to the hill. He's going to put a style in play. He knows what's expected of Manchester United. This is Ineos's undisputed choice of manager. If they were to go for Kieran McKenna now, it would be a major, major risk. It's not what they need now. They need someone who's going to come in and bring instant results, because they're 14th in the Premier League table. And there is nobody out there who is that obvious candidate now. Tuchel was the obvious candidate because he had the pedigree, and there would have been caveats in appointing him. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give Ty another shout out. I mean, he was saying yesterday, Tuchel's CV is underwhelming. I thought, I think that's, I can't agree with that. I completely agree. There was mitigation with the trophies he's won and at the clubs as well. Absolutely, you should be expected to win the league with PSG. The Chelsea Champions League win came during COVID, and yes, Roberto Di Matteo is a Champions League winning coach. You're expected to win the league with Bayern Munich. At Borussia Dortmund, they won the German Cup, which is not a lot to write home about, but there's a hell of a lot more to him than that. And I think he'd have been ideal for United this time. I think I just think that's what they needed for the here and now, because they're 14th in the Premier League table and they're not improving. And this season feels like an extension of last season, and that's why we're judging Erik Ten Hag on 14 months and counting, rather than just the 11 games they've had so far this season.
Graham Potter and Eddie Howe are 100% the best English managers available, but Tuchel is a cut above, isn't he? And he's a winner, most importantly, when you look at his record and the trophies that he's won. And hopefully he delivers that with England. The biggest question that everyone wants answered then, Samuel, will you be booing the TV when Tuchel does not sing the national anthem in his first game in charge?
I completely understand. I mean, we can't make this too England-centric a podcast for obvious reasons, but I completely understand why that question was asked.
He handled it very well as well. I thought his press conference was impressive, wasn't it?
I know the reporter who asked that question, and it's a question that a lot of fans will be asking. It's a question that a lot of fans will be wondering, why was that asked? I couldn't give a toss if Thomas Tuchel doesn't sing the national anthem. In fact, I don't think he should sing it. He shouldn't feel the need to do something he's being railroaded into doing. It's a personal choice. We're not all enthralled to the monarchy. When we're in the press box at Wembley and we have to stand and observe it, a minority. I'd say you could probably count on one hand, looking around, those in the press box who actually sing the national anthem. I don't sing it. I don't think you sang it on our appearances there this year.
Rich Fay
It's
didn't sing it
personal
either, did he?
choice. No, he was never going to sing it. He was.
I think he might have sat down with his arms crossed in protest. Yeah.
I think he was getting a picture of James McLean up on his phone and holding it aloft or something like that.
That'll fit nicely with the poster in his bedroom. A nice transition into a match day. Let's talk about United a bit more then and move away from the England chat, because where does this leave Manchester United in terms of candidates who are available who could possibly replace Ten Hag? Exactly, that's how I feel when I look at the list too, because Ruud van Nistelrooy is the bookmaker's favourite. Gareth Southgate is next. He has actually ruled himself out of work for a year. Michael Carrick comes after that. He's at Middlesbrough right now, around 7th in the Championship. Kieran McKenna, as you've just mentioned, signed a long-term deal at Ipswich. Graham Potter, Thomas Frank, Ruben Amorim, who's at Sporting Lisbon. And then you get the likes of, anyone and everyone. Zidane's the next one, and that's quite fanciful as well, isn't it? The name I've been banging the drum with, Samuel, sitting at around 50-1, Julian Nagelsmann. Me and Ty had a little debate about Nagelsmann yesterday, and he said there was more chance of United getting Emery. He was basically arguing that it would be easier to buy him out, Aston Villa's contract, than it would be Germany's. But I actually think the opposite. And although Nagelsmann has renewed his contract with Germany, I do generally believe that United have been backed into a corner now, and they need to do something. And they need to make a statement, and Nagelsmann would be a statement. Obviously, the key to this would be actually selling the project to him, sitting down and convincing him that it's worth joining, especially in the current predicament that they're in. But I believe they could do it. It might be fanciful, it might be far-fetched, but when you look at the list of candidates right now, they're all none of them are inspiring, are they? It is pretty grim to read.
That's another problem, which is of Ineos's own making, that there have been very obvious options available to them this calendar year at different times, and Pochettino would obviously have been one because he was out of work for a few months after Chelsea sacked him, and United have considered him goodness knows how many times. He's been in the mix at various points in the recent United history, dating back to May 2016, when Sir Alex Ferguson was very publicly endorsing him by taking him out to lunch in London because he didn't want Jose Mourinho to get the job. And I'm sure we'll come on to Ferguson in a bit, but that gives you an idea of how selfish Ferguson can be and has been regarding United, where he's still tried to exert his influence when he's had no influence since he decided to make David Moyes the manager, which was the records will show, I said it at the time, that was not a good decision. And I was very confident that David Moyes was going to be a failure at Manchester United, and he was. And that was because Sir Alex Ferguson decided to appoint a guy who was Scottish and had been in charge of a pretty big club in England for 11 years, but he hadn't won anything at that club. And Ferguson's card was marked there. And it really must grate with United fans that they have done exactly what happened with Busby and Wilf McGuinness in the late 60s. There was an interesting piece this week that was very, very critical of Ferguson over him losing his ambassadorial salary. And the salient point in it was that with Arsene Wenger, after Arsene Wenger left Arsenal, I think since he left in 2018, he stepped foot back into the Emirates Stadium once. And I get that, a former manager should feel comfortable about coming back, but there should have been some attempt at a clean break. And Ferguson was just this spectre. He was present throughout Moyes' time, and he's been very present for many of United's matches over the past 11 years. And all it's done is just evoke memories of Busby, who, after he stepped down, he still occupied the manager's office at Old Trafford, extraordinarily. Wilf McGuinness had to have a manager's office elsewhere. And so there have been these parallels that have developed there. And it's another reason why United are in the pickle that they're in at the moment. And of course, Pochettino is now the US men's national team coach. Tuchel is now the England coach, which you'd have had good money on that at the start of the year. The Bayern Munich and the Chelsea coach, both quitting or losing their jobs. and just going into international football, it does feel a little bit like they are wasted there. I think they've got a hell of a lot more to give in club football, and they're still pretty young enough relatively as far as managers go to get back into the club game at some point. And that's reflected also by the length of Tuchel's contract, which I think is sensible, because you should go tournament to tournament. There have been times in the past where England have given a new manager, sorry, not a new manager, they've given the manager a new contract before the tournament started. They did that with Fabio Capello before the 2010 World Cup. And then England were dreadful at that World Cup. They won one of their 4 games and they got trounced 4-1 by Germany in the round of 16. And as you said, when you go on, like, if you Google next Man United manager odds and you see the list and you think, crikey, they are in a pickle here. And that's why you can't discount Southgate, because say United did sack Ten Hag, or I mean, they would be doing this before they sacked him. I still wouldn't be surprised. There's no reason why Gareth Southgate couldn't change his mind, because Man United came calling. If Manchester United come calling and say, we want you to be our manager, I know you're putting your hands to your head, and I'm putting my hands to. I'm metaphorically putting my hands to my head, because there's no way he should ever manage Manchester United, but he's still really high up on bookies' chalkboards, even though last week he said he's not going to manage for a year, because you can still see it happening, and there should be outcry from supporters if he was appointed. It would be one of the most unpopular managerial appointments in the history of Manchester United. And as I've said to you before, there have been 3 men in the history of human civilization who've managed United to the title. Gareth Southgate would not be the 4th. I'm pretty confident in saying that. And there is an element of it's a freakish club in a lot of ways as well, because talking to Ty earlier, he said, since the Second World War, only 2 men have managed United to the title, and they happen to be born within the same 20-mile radius in a tiny country, Scotland, and they lasted more than 20 years as manager of the club, and they built dynasties. And apart from that, nobody's ever actually got close to taking United to the title. It's a real peculiar quirk of the club's history that they had extraordinary success under 2 Scottish managers, decades apart. And those 2 managers, I mean, Sir Matt Busby pretty much built Old Trafford up into the stadium that it was. So Alex Ferguson expanded it into the best-in-class stadium that it became in the late 90s and early to mid-2000s. But beyond those 2, managers have never, ever come close to making United champions. So you're inclined to wonder, is there a guy born in Scotland or in the Glasgow area or close to Glasgow who maybe United should be keeping their eye on just for the sake of omens? Because, as I said earlier, I really do not know where they go from here now, because I don't see someone that they are going to buy out of their contract, having sacked a manager who will cost them something like £15 million, maybe a little bit more in compensation, when they've got PSR to worry about. The overall deal of sacking a manager, hiring a manager who's attached to a club, it could be nearly £30 million, maybe beyond £30 million. Are they going to do that? But they need to do something, because look at what's happened so far this season.
We're scratching our heads. Fans are scratching their heads. Ineos officials sound like they're scratching their heads. But I'll point at Liverpool, Samuel, in the last 10 years. There was a point where it just seemed like they'd be destined to be in the doldrums for a long, long time. They were never going to win another trophy. And now, since Jurgen Klopp, obviously, he kind of restored them back to the top of the table. And look at how they're performing now. On Slot comes in and kind of continues his work and builds on that. United need their Klopp, don't they? They need an appointment like that. But those managers are hard to find. Maybe that manager is in Glasgow somewhere knocking around. That's an interesting theory, I think.
I mean, Aberdeen are doing quite well at the moment in the Scottish Premiership, and obviously the last time they won the Scottish title, it was Alex Ferguson who was the manager. So maybe they need to give someone needs to put on a Scottish accent and get through to the Aberdeen manager's office. As that's a reference. That's literally how United opened discussions with Alex Ferguson in 1986. I think it was Mike Edelson, one of the directors, faked a Scottish accent to get through to Ferguson's office line by calling. He had to call the Aberdeen switchboard first. So maybe that's what Jim Ratcliffe has got to impersonate. Nicola Sturgeon or somebody else.
I was
Who
wondering where
knows?
you were going with that. Yeah, my uncle
Yeah.
is from Aberdeen, and he's a United fan because of Ferguson. Like a lot of people from Aberdeen.
Has he got his pro license badge?
Well, that's what I was about to say. Maybe I should give him a text and find out what he's
Yeah.
doing. He's usually on call, so he should reply pretty quickly. That'll be it for part one. We'll be back in a moment for part two. Welcome back to part two of the Manchester is Red podcast. We'll continue with the Fergie chat then, Samuel, because as you said briefly there, it was a big story earlier in the week that Ferguson is stepping down from his ambassadorial role at the club. He earned around just a little bit over 2 million a year for that position, which he held since retiring in 2013. There was a lot of mixed reaction online, which there usually is on topics like this, to Ferguson stepping down because of the circumstances. Some fans argued it was disrespectful to the man who built the club, who is the reason why there's such value in the football club at this present time, while others suggested it was a sensible decision, considering he's 83, he doesn't need the money, there's been 250 people made redundant at the club, and that would contradict that message as well. I'd probably be of that train of thought. I think it is sensible and logical, although when you first hear it, it probably takes you a bit back and you're a bit shocked at it. But considering all the facts, considering the context, it's probably a sensible decision from Sergio Ratcliffe and Ineos. How do you feel about it?
I don't think we're going to be doing a whip round for Fergie
No.
just because he's about to miss out on £2 million a year when he turns 83 in December. He's made an awful lot of money out of Manchester United because he was such a great manager for the club. He did absolute wonders for the club, and it was understandable and logical that he got an ambassadorial role. The interesting thing about that was that when he became an ambassador on that salary, he was on more than the England manager at the time, Roy Hodgson. I think his salary as an ambassador was greater than Brendan Rodgers' salary at the time, and he was the Liverpool manager. And Liverpool, after United, they're the biggest club in Britain. So he was very handsomely paid to be an ambassador. He didn't do a great deal of travelling in his ambassadorial role as some of the former players do, in terms of going abroad to fan events and going on pre-season tours and doing meet and greets with supporters. Ferguson's ambassadorial remit was largely restricted to the confines of Greater Manchester and attending games. And of course, before he became ill in 2018, he was a regular at away games as well. And I found it the year he retired, and of course his wife was a big factor in retiring because her sister Bridget had passed away in December 2012, so about 5 months before Ferguson officially stepped down at United. And of course, he said that she, Lady Cathy's sister, they were so close, and he didn't want his wife to feel isolated, which is perfectly understandable. And they had, they had 10 years together with him in retirement mode, I guess, until she sadly passed away last year. But I still felt during that first season under Moyes, on Boxing Day away to Hull, which isn't too long a trip, I suppose, and it was a 12:30 kickoff, and there Ferguson was in the crowd still, and you thought like there was still an addiction to the game and to being involved at Manchester United that was never really ever going to abate with him, I didn't think, until he suffered a brain hemorrhage in May 2018. And he will always be welcome at the club. He's got a row of seats with his name attached to them in the director's box. It was, I think I even predicted it would happen before Ratcliffe emerged for the Tottenham game in January, that there's every chance he'll come out with Sir Alex Ferguson in tow, and of course they did simultaneously. But as I said, he's made a hell of a lot. He's made millions and millions and millions of being a Manchester United manager and a Manchester United ambassador. And as you said, in the context of the cost cutting at the club, where 250 people have been made redundant and they weren't paid anywhere near as much as Sir Alex Ferguson, it's a logical measure to take, and I'm not outraged by it. I found Eric Cantona's post to be pretty peculiar. Of course, when you see
Rio Ferdinand's post was better. He suggested there being a hit put on Ferguson,
better or worse, better or
Sopranos
worse.
style.
Yeah,
I just mean in terms of amusement.
I think Rio's in his mid to late 40s, but he talks like he's 14 at times on Twitter anyway.
Cantona's was serious, and then Ferdinand kind of came at it from like a slang kind of like a teenager way of approaching the topic, didn't he?
I think he referred to a hat trick as a hattie the other week, and it was almost "How do you do, fellow kids?" That gif of Steve Buscemi. So I'm not remotely offended by it. I think there was a headline this week that said Manchester United fans call for players to make up Sir Alex Ferguson's salary. I mean, he's not going to struggle. He's well looked after. He's
well, just the other week, this is in partnership with his friends, I must add, but he set a record for the most expensive national hunt racehorse, and he loves his race, and he's obviously very into it. And he does splash the cash in that sphere, so he'll be okay, won't he? He's not short of money.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to struggle whatsoever. I don't think he's going to be walking up to Old Trafford with a begging bowl at any time soon at all. He was out I think he was pictured out in the week, and he looked pretty well, smartly dressed. Yeah, as I said, he's not going to struggle. It's one of those that there'll be some negative feedback. There'll be some bad PR to incur if you're Ineos, but it's going to blow over very quickly, and it feels like it's blown over already. I mean, this is a manager who, when Wayne Rooney got his pay rise in 2010, he told the Glazer family that no other player should get more money than him as manager, and he ensured that his status as Manchester United manager lined his pockets. And sometimes that was to the detriment of the club, because certainly in his final years, they were not paying a lot of money for on transfer fees on players. There was a reduction in a pretty stark reduction in how much they were paying to sign players, and also the identity of players they were signing at that time.
And definitely since the news dropped during the international break, that would have played a part, because the news cycle's dead. It's quiet, isn't it, during the break? And that's why it was probably an even bigger story than it would have been, say, if United were playing on the weekend and had a midweek game. On that subject, the football is back this weekend, Samuel. Thank God. Saturday afternoon, 3 p.m, Old Trafford. Brentford are visiting Manchester. I said on a previous podcast, probably the first one we did during the break, the United should be brushing past the side like Brentford, and you said that's disrespectful. It will be hard work, and I agree. I think they should brush past the side like Brentford, but it probably will be hard work. In terms of who's going to play, we discussed Lindelof playing at right back. He came on for the second half against Aston Villa because Mazraoui had some heart complications. Should we talk about Harry Amas? Because I don't think we've actually talked about him for a little while now. He demonstrated a lot of potential in pre-season. He looked really good on the tour. I think you spoke to him after one of the games, maybe in San Diego. You'll correct us with that.
Correct. Yeah.
I've watched a lot of them for the academy, and he's made excellent progress. I think the thing is with Amas, though, he's not the biggest lad, although he's technically exceptional. I think his aggression helped him a lot in those pre-season games, so he kind of compensated for his lack of height and stature, where he was flying into challenges, and he looked capable of playing at senior level. But I think there's definitely a feeling now that Ten Hag has not picked him, probably because of the physicality side of the game. Do you think that's a fair assessment? Do you think that's why we haven't seen him? Because if someone told you in the summer that Amas had yet to make his debut, considering there has been cup competitions and there has been opportunities and the injuries in that position, it would probably be a tad surprising, wouldn't it?
I suppose so, but I go back, and I think I mentioned it to Ty on the podcast last week when we spoke to Ten Hag at UCLA at the start of August, and the final question of the sit-down centred on Amas because we had a feature going out on him, Toby Collier and Ethan Wheatley, and he said that he was still 3 months away. So that's why, although it was still surprising that he wasn't even in the squad for the Community Shield, when he would have been in pretty much every predicted starting lineup in newspapers that morning, it did offer some context and did account for why he wasn't even on the bench, even though he should have been. the reason why United didn't win the Community Shield was because Ten Hag put a non-fullback on at fullback, and Facundo Pellistri was caught out for Bernardo Silva's late equaliser. And that discussion we had with Ten Hag, I think it was on 1st of August at UCLA, we're almost there in terms of the 3-month mark. That would be around the time of the League Cup tie against Leicester in which is on October the 20. Is it the 20? Sorry, it's October the 30th, I think it is. And so that would seem like a good time to have him at least in the squad. And let's not forget, he was in the matchday squad 7 times last season. He was on the bench for a 2-2 draw against Liverpool. He was on the bench for an FA Cup semi-final against Coventry. And he was also in the dugout to see United surrender 4-0 against Crystal Palace that night as well. So he has got reasonable experience. And as you said, he did show pretty decent aggression during his pre-season performances. I actually thought his performance level steadily improved with every game, even though the highlight for him would have been the Real Betis game, the second one, because United won and he had a good impact in an attacking capacity. But in some ways, I thought he showed more maturity, and on an individual basis, certainly it was a better performance against Liverpool in the final game, even though United lost 3-0, because he was coming up against better calibre of players, and he actually held his own quite well against Mohamed Salah that night. But as we saw against Barnsley in the 3rd round of the League Cup, their United are 4-0 up, and you've got Ethan Wheatley on the bench, and he doesn't even get a kick as Xerxes, Mazraoui and Fernandes come on, and United end up thrashing them 7-0. It must have piqued Hamas that night that Toby Collier started at left back, because there was no reason why Collier couldn't have started in midfield, and Hamas could have started at left back. Collier could have started in midfield that night, and United would still have beaten Barnsley. But he is an option, but I think we would be slightly surprised if he's in the squad this weekend, unless there are more injuries that Ten Hag will inform us of on Friday. Lisandro Martinez is an option at left back as well, of course. He didn't start for Argentina this week. I'm not sure he starts in their first game as last week either. I suspect that's more down to his form rather than Ten Hag's rather tenuous use of the word rotation, which he is using for literally every change he makes to a team when it's clear that players have been outright dropped for their performances, such as when De Ligt and Martinez came out of the side against Aston Villa. So he has got the option to play Dalot at right back, which would be advisable. But then again, he did play Lindelof at left back a few times last season.
More chances of pigs flying, I think, than Dalot at right back on this season's evidence. I think it'll be Dalot at left back and Lindelof at right back on Saturday.
Well, there's every chance of that, and of course you'd expect De Ligt to come in, and Johnny Evans, he deserves to keep his place after that performance against Aston Villa. But it's a different team they'll be coming up against. I mean, Brentford, Thomas Frank did a really good piece on Monday Night Football last year when he was explaining his tactics and how they always go to a back 3 with wing backs against top 6 teams. I mean, United aren't a top 6 team anymore. They finished 8th last season. And the way United are playing, do they actually warrant going to a back 3? It has worked for Brentford to an extent, or I mean, it outright worked for them when they thrashed them 4-0 a couple of years ago. And certainly their performances against United last season were, for very different reasons, impressive. Yet they did also concede rather extraordinarily in the 93rd, 96th and 97th minutes against United, home and away, and didn't beat them in either game. Speaking to our editor earlier, I mean, I did a piece on Thomas Frank around the game, going into it in the week for Friday morning. And there were 2 quotes for 2 different games against United, roughly 2.5 years apart. Ralf Rangnick being manager in one game, Ten Hag manager in the other game. And Frank said after both games that Brentford destroyed Manchester United. He used that word regarding the January 22 game and the March 24 game. And my editor said he, just out of interest, searched Thomas Frank destroyed. And he said that it looks like he's never actually used that word in a post-match briefing other than when Brentford have come up against Manchester United. Unfortunately for United, this weekend's game is at Old Trafford, and they have fared better at Old Trafford against Brentford than they have at the Community Stadium. They've won all 3 games against them. Last season was pretty extraordinary circumstances, with those 2 goals in added time to go from 1-0 down to win 2-1 in some of the most euphoric scenes you could ever have seen at Old Trafford. And then at the opposite end of the scale, you've got Brentford, who've scored inside 2 minutes in their past 4 Premier League games. So it's certainly a game not to be late for this weekend.
And Buemo's a brilliant player, isn't he? He's one to watch this weekend. He always is. If you watch Brentford, he's gone under the radar for a long time.
I think cannot understand that. Yeah,
I know. I think people are finally starting to realise what a talent he is. He's been in my FPL team for around two seasons now, and he's got us a lot of points. So,
he scored more goals. He scored more league goals than United this season, and Brentford.
It's not hard, though, is it? It's only 5.
No, and Brentford scored as many league goals against Wolves as United have in 7 games this season. So the form book really needs to be not just chucked out the window by United, but torn to shreds, eviscerated, incinerated, whatever word you can use, and just come up. They need to just come up with a result that is going to really. People need to look at it and think, right, raise their eyebrows at it, because there's not going to be a great deal of confidence in United getting a result going into this game, I would imagine.
Yeah, they need to improve. A lot of players need to improve, and that includes Manuel Ugarte. I also thought it was worth chatting about him. Signed on deadline day for around £42 million. There was obviously some add-ons in that as well. So it was €50 million with add-ons. He promised to be an upgrade
£50 million,
on
pounds, wasn't it? I think.
Just over pounds. £50 million, so that equates to £42 million. Yeah, obviously
up front,
with £8 million in add-ons potentially. He promised to be an upgrade on Casemiro, Samuel, and everyone was quite excited, and he felt like a really significant signing on deadline day from PSG. When you think about what Casemiro did so brilliantly in his first season at the club, protecting the back 4, intercepting balls, recovering balls, and releasing forward players, that's what people wanted Ugarte to do. His best performances came against Barnsley. I actually laughed in an article, because when you think about Anthony and his best performances, they've came against lower league opposition in cup competitions. Ugarte does not want that in common with Anthony. He does not want that common trait. His only start, he was substituted against Tottenham at half time, and he looked really off the pace, didn't he? A bit overwhelmed.
When they were down to 10 men, in fairness to him.
Yeah, that as well, of course. But he's been an unused substitute though recently, and he's not got a kick. And Casemiro,
did he come off at half time against Spurs, or was it Xerxes?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he did. Hooked at half time.
It was Xerxes who came off at half time. I can't remember if they both came off. I know Xerxes definitely double check came off.
But either way, it's not been an ideal start, has it, for Ugarte? I personally expected more. Look, I'm not out here killing them. He's only had a few months at the club, and you always give a player in his first season the benefit of the doubt. Exactly, and his integration was delayed. Now, do you know what? I think you're right. I'm talking rubbish there. Brought off in the second half, I believe. Yeah, for Christian Eriksen. So I'll bow down to your knowledge there, Samuel. Well done. I'll get
we can agree he was crap.
Yeah, that's the point, isn't it? Anyways, that's the wider point.
Apart from Anana. Yeah, well, it's not a surprise, unfortunately, because how many new signings have gone into United and underperformed or struggled or not lived up to their billing, and Ten Hag puts it correctly. He said, "You need time, but you don't get time at Manchester United. That's how it works. Some people judge you definitively immediately. You'll be scrutinised from the get-go, absolutely. But that's the occupational hazard of playing for Manchester United. And if you're playing for United, you're going to be well paid. You're going to have the coping mechanisms to deal with criticism, scrutiny, etc. And Ugarte had to be prepared for that. If he hasn't been prepared for that, then that's a failing of the people around him. It's the failing of the people at United. But those are the hard knocks of playing for United. They needed someone who's going to come in and be in that position in particular, be very, very good. And the Liverpool performance on the day that Ugarte was paraded on the Old Trafford pitch that reinforced how important he was going to be, or had to be, to them, because Casemiro had absolutely his worst game for United that day. And unfortunately for United, Ugarte he is struggling to get up to speed. I think he came off injured for Uruguay this week as well, didn't he? So he may not even play this weekend. I think it was, whether he got injured or not midweek, it was maybe doubtful that he would start this weekend, just because of the timings with players coming back from South America and how burdensome that role is in central midfield. You know, that you have to factor that in terms of who's been away. Are they fresh? Are they not fresh enough? What the opposition like? Brentford like to press high. They are aggressive. They've got a set style. The players know their cues. Those players that are going to be in their midfield this weekend will be a lot more familiar with the rhythm and the tempo of the Premier League than whoever United play, more or less, apart from probably Christian Eriksen, due to his experience playing in England with, ironically, Brentford as well as Tottenham. And maybe you're looking at Ugarte, if he is fit, possibly starting against Fenerbahce. And then you've got this invidious, it's a potentially invidious position, in that you're pitting him against two midfielders who United sold or elected not to sign permanently under Ten Hag. And then it's added pressure on him to perform against those players, Fred and Sofian Amrabat. But again, you've got to try and flip it. You've got to try and see the positive of it. Right, let me show you what I can do and why I'm a better midfielder than those two. Don't be putting the white flag up about it. Try and give us a very different angle to write about him. But
you should be thinking, I'm at Man United for a reason. And
yeah,
those two players, Amrabat and Fred, are playing in Turkey. That's the mindset.
Yeah,
that should be the. But yeah,
absolutely. That's his team talk sorted for him if he indeed does start that game. Unfortunately, I think there are too many players in the United squad who they're possibly more of a negative mindset than we are, in that they just almost see an excuse not to perform. And that's why, as we've discussed before, there are so few players in that squad who you look at and you think, yeah, they could be part of a title-winning United side, because there is that mentality that Ten Hag absolutely repaired in his first season. It's broken again, and there's a lot broken at United, and the power brokers are not fixing it.
Ten Hag will speak at a press conference tomorrow afternoon at Carrington. We briefly said press conferences, when you expect them to be good, when you expect there to be fireworks, often disappoint. You're obviously attending that tomorrow, Samuel, ahead of the game. Briefly, what are you expecting?
I don't expect fireworks. It will be, it's business as usual. Of course he was going to be in charge. I suspect he will give questions related to his position very short shrift, even though there is a fair bit to go at, given the developments of the meetings. I mean, there are a lot of pertinent questions to ask him, and his answers will be newsworthy. Whatever he says, I think that the Manchester United manager could be a mute and they'd still be quotable. That's just the way it goes. That's because of the position of the role of being Manchester United manager, and how fascinating it is, and how many people are fascinated by it as well. So I go in, my preparation is to have one question. If that gets asked, I've got to have a backup question, and then I always have a third in reserve just in case that gets asked as well. So, as I said, there's always plenty to go at after an international fortnight, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're a tad underwhelmed by the open bit tomorrow anyway.
Or the performance on Saturday, but let's hope not. Let's hope they come storming out of the gates and really fun Brentford, because it's Brentford. It's Brentford. Thank you very much.
You're disrespecting
I know I am. Yeah. I'm just having a joke. Thanks for your time, Samuel.
Thank you, Stephen.
And thanks to listeners as usual. Have a great weekend. Enjoy the game on Saturday. We'll be back on Monday. Take care.